how she is, Dad. 5 months after my wife passed away, I took her broken reading glasses to get them repaired. They were something she wore every single day of her life, and they were the only physical keepsake I had left of her. But when the technician inspected the frames, his hands began to shake. He'd laughed about it. Instead of our returning them to me, he locked the front door of the shop, pulled me into the back room, and said something that completely shattered my entire world. You know how she is, Dad? He told me to check her will immediately, because if I didn't, I would be the next one to suffer the exact same fate. Then, he showed me what was hidden inside the frame. You know how she is, Dad. When I saw the face on that screen, I almost collapsed. I am so incredibly grateful that you are here to listen to this story today. Before we get into it, please leave a comment below letting me know where you are listening from. What city? What country? I would love to connect with you. Also, just as a quick note, this story incorporates some fictional elements for creative and reflective purposes, so any resemblance to real names or places is purely coincidental. But the lessons I'm about to share are absolutely worth your time. It had been 5 months since I lost Catherine. Yet, her reading glasses still sat on the corner of her desk, exactly where she had left them that final morning. I walked past that desk every single day, but I never had the courage to touch a thing. Her favorite pen, her half-finished crossword puzzle, and the little jade plant she had cared for over 12 years. But that afternoon, something shifted. Maybe it was the way the autumn sunlight would stream through the window, looking exactly like it used to when it caught the silver in her hair while she worked. I finally pulled open the desk drawer. The glasses were tucked under a stack of gardening catalogs. Catalogs snapped, and the frame struck. Fox kicked them up. The left hinge snapped, and the frame picked them up right down the middle. Health audacity about it. You know how she is, Dad. I sat there holding the two pieces, feeling like I had just destroyed the very last physical connection I had to her. Catherine wore those glasses every single day. She was incredibly consistent about it. She would never leave the house without them. I remembered how she would push them up her nose when she was concentrating, and how she would always use that little blue cloth from her pocket to wipe the lenses. I couldn't just throw them away. I simply couldn't do it. I couldn't just quiet for a weekday. Ballard Avenue was quiet for a weekday. The rail had stopped, and the air had that fresh, crisp scent of Seattle right after a downpour. Malzoos, twos, crisp, tune, tuzu, twos, two in. Two. I parked outside Porter's Optical, a tiny shop squeezed between a Thai restaurant and a used bookstore. Every Saturday morning, you know how she is, Dad. Catherine and I used to walk down this exact street. Daniel Porter had been a close friend of mine for over 20 years. We first met back in 2004 on a commercial renovation project. When he opened this shop, 10 years ago, Catherine and I sent him flowers. After she passed, he came to the service, held my hand, and told me to call him if I ever needed anything at all. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in. Daniel looked up from behind the counter. He laid down the frames he was adjusting and greeted me warmly. I placed the broken glasses on the counter between us. You know how she is, Dad. The moment he looked at them, his expression shifted. It wasn't surprise. It was a look that bordered on deep concern. He picked them up, turning them over in his hands. He took a jeweler's loupe from his drawer, leaned down, and carefully studied the right temple arm. Then he froze completely. When he finally stood up, he didn't look at me right away. He walked to the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and pulled down the shade over the glass door. My stomach tightened. I asked him what was going on, point to the back, point telling me I needed to see something, and that I should probably sit down first. I followed him past the display cases into a cluttered workshop. He cleared a spot on his desk, placed the glasses under a bright work lamp, and opened his laptop. You know how she is, Dad. He plugged a tiny cable into a spot I hadn't even noticed before, a hidden microport on the inside of the temple arm. A file directory popped up on his screen. You know how she is, Dad. There were 3 video files and 2 audio files, all dated from April. April was the very month Catherine passed away. Daniel clicked on the first video. The camera was shaky at first, but then it stabilized. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. It was our kitchen. I could see the edge of the refrigerator, the fruit bowl Catherine always kept on the island. Then Ryan walked into the frame. My son, my only son, my son. You know how she is, Dad? He is 39, a civil attorney at a downtown firm with his own private practice. He was wearing the navy suit I bought him for his birthday last year. His movements were deliberate. There was no hesitation at all. He opened the cabinet where Catherine kept her daily vitamins and took down the large bottle. He pulled a small plastic bag from his pocket. Inside were some white tablets. You know how she is, Dad. He unscrewed the cap of the vitamins bottle, poured the tablets inside, shook it, and placed it right back where it belonged. The entire process took less than 30 seconds. Daniel's voice was a quiet whisper next to me, telling me there was more, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. Ryan was washing his hands at the sink. You know how she, Dad, drying them carefully with a dish towel. Then he walked out of the frame. I heard the front door close. The timestamp in the corner read April 14th, 7:15 a.m. Catherine collapsed on April 15th at 2:47 a.m. You know how she is, Dad? I had dialed 911. The paramedics said it looked like a sudden cardiovascular event. By the time we reached the hospital, she was already gone. Daniel let the silence linger for a moment. Then, with a voice heavy with anger and sorrow, he told me that Catherine had come to see him 3 weeks before she passed. She asked him to install that camera. She said she needed proof of something, but she refused to tell him what it was. He told me she made him promise never to tell me unless something happened to her. He paused, his hand hovering over the mouse. He admitted he had no idea what she had recorded until just now, but he urged me to check the estate papers immediately. Because if Ryan was capable of doing this to her, I would be next. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away from the frozen frame on the screen showing my son's hand holding that plastic bag. You know how she is, Dad, pouring those tablets into my wife's vitamins. The glasses still lay on the desk between us. I picked them up with a trembling hand, turned them over, and finally saw what I had missed all this time. The tiny lens, the hidden port, and the immense weight Catherine had been carrying all on her own. She knew. She had known for weeks, and she had left this for me. You know how she is, Dad. Daniel clicked on the next video file, and I realized I had been living a complete lie for the last 5 months. Daniel didn't ask if I wanted to keep watching. He just moved the cursor to the second file and hit play. Maybe he knew that if he gave me the choice, you know how she is, Dad, I might have walked out of that shop and spent the rest of my life pretending I had never seen the first video. But I couldn't leave. Not now. The screen flickered, showing our kitchen again. Judging by the light coming through the window, it was later that same day. Catherine's glasses were now sitting on the counter, facing the stove. I could see her moving in and out of the frame, preparing her usual breakfast. Blueberry oatmeal. You know how she is, Dad. The exact same thing she had eaten every morning for 30 years. Ryan appeared in the doorway. You know how she is. He was still in his navy suit, but his tie was loosened. He leaned against the counter and watched her. She didn't turn around. She ignored him entirely. You know how she is, Dad, continuing to stir her oatmeal. He said something I couldn't quite catch. Catherine's shoulders went rigid, but she still didn't look at him. After a moment, you know how she is, Dad. Ryan stepped away from the counter and left. The video jumped to 9:30 p.m. The kitchen was dark. Except for the light above the sink. The glasses were in a different position now, facing the breakfast nook where Catherine liked to have her evening tea. I recognized her favorite blue mug, the one with the chipped handle that she refused to replace. Ryan entered the frame again. This time he was on the phone. You know how she is, Dad, pacing back and forth. His voice came through clearly. Catherine Kickis. Catherine must have been sitting close to the glasses for the microphone to pick it up so well. He said the job was done and that he used the dosage they had agreed on. A woman's voice responded faintly through the phone speaker. A woman's voice responded faintly through his daughter's voice anywhere, with that slight southern drawl she never quite lost. She asked him if he was sure it wouldn't leave a trace, her voice tight with anxiety. Ryan stopped pacing. He assured her it would dissolve completely in the system. Looking exactly like a natural cardiac event. He said the emergency room wouldn't even run tests unless they had a reason to suspect something. And why would they? You know how she is, Dad. She was 62, had high blood pressure, and was on medication. It would look like a natural medical crisis. Jessica asked when it would take effect. He replied 24 to 48 hours, maybe sooner depending on how much she took. He paused, saying it would be quick and she wouldn't suffer. There was a long silence. Then Jessica whispered that this was actually happening. Ryan told her it was the only way, reminding her that the casinos wouldn't wait forever and that the debts were now in his name too. He said once she was gone, you know how she is, Dad, they would use the insurance payout to settle everything and finally be free. Jessica then asked about his father. Ryan's laugh was chilling. He said I would be a complete wreck. You know how she is, Dad, probably unable to think straight for months. You know how she is, Dad. He said he would step in to handle the estate and make sure everything was in order, and that I would sign whatever he put in front of me. The call ended. How she is. Ryan stood there, staring at his phone for a moment before walking out of the frame. The kitchen was empty again, save for Catherine's blue mug sitting on the table. You know, unfinished tea, still sending up a faint wisp of steam. I couldn't feel my hand. I couldn't feel anything at all. It felt as though everything inside of me had been scooped out, leaving only an empty shell sitting in that chair. Daniel reached over and paused the video, gently telling me there was one more, but that I didn't have to watch it. But I did. I had to. He clicked on the third file. The timestamp read April 15th, 2:47 a.m. The kitchen lights were on. Catherine's glasses were back on the counter, facing the table. Catherine's were back on the counter, facing the table. I could see her sitting in the breakfast nook, her back to the camera. She was wearing the blue robe I got her for Christmas 2 years ago. She stood up reaching for something on the counter. Her hand missed, grasping at thin air. Then she collapsed. You know how she is, Dad. I watched her fall, like watching a slow-motion accident, knowing exactly what was coming, yet unable to look away or stop it. She went down hard. You know how she is, Dad. Her head streaked the edge of the table before she slumped onto the tile floor. Then Ryan appeared. He must have been waiting in the hallway. He stepped into the frame, looked down at her, and then checked his watch. He didn't kneel. He didn't call for help, and he didn't touch her. He simply stood there, watching his own mother slip away on the kitchen floor. You know how she is, Dad, checking his watch every few minutes as if he were timing it. I counted. 12 minutes. For 12 whole minutes, he watched her lie there, completely still. You know how she is, Dad, her breathing growing fainter. 12 minutes just to ensure there was no turning back. Finally, he pulled out his phone and dialed. When he spoke, his voice turned frantic and desperate, a performance worthy of an award. He yelled into the phone, saying his mother had collapsed, that he didn't know what happened, and begging them to send help immediately. The video ended. I sat there staring at the black screen. Daniel said nothing. What could he say? My son, my only son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I taught ride to throw a baseball, to tie his tie. The man I put through law school. Tom celebrated at his wedding and bragged about to all my friends. That same man had stood over his own mother, watching her take her last breath while checking his watch to make sure she was truly gone. Daniel's hand moved over the keyboard and hesitated. Daniel's hand moved over the keyboard and he pointed to something at the bottom of the screen, another file. He gently told me there was an audio memo recorded on April 14th at 11:47 p.m., just 3 hours before she collapsed. He asked if I wanted to hear it. I couldn't speak, so I just managed a nod. Daniel clicked the file. You know how she is, Dad, and Catherine's voice filled the small room. I wasn't prepared to hear her voice again. He'd laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. 5 months of absolute silence. 5 months of walking past her empty chair at breakfast. 5 months of picking up the phone only to remember she wasn't there anymore. 5 months of trying to learn how to live in a house that still carried the faint scent of her lavender soap. And here she was. You know how she is, Dad, speaking to me from a moment just 3 hours before everything changed. She said my name. But the way she said it, softly, with a heavy sorrow and a profound depth of emotion, made my chest tighten painfully. Daniel sat next to me in the back room of the shop, his hand resting on the edge of the desk. He had already seen the first video of Ryan altering Catherine's vitamin bottle. You know how she is, Dad. Now we were listening to the audio file from April 14th at 11:47 p.m. These were the last words my wife ever recorded. She said that if I was hearing this, she must already be gone, and she expressed how deeply sorry she was. I gripped the armrests of my chair so tightly, my knuckles turned white. She urged me to listen carefully because she didn't have much time. She explained there was a safe deposit box at the downtown branch of Pacific Northwest Bank, box number 4 Northwest Bank, box number 47. The key was in her desk, in the bottom drawer, inside a blue catalogs. She told me I needed to go there and open it. I glanced at Daniel. Whoa. He was staring at his laptop screen, his jaw set firm. She said that inside the box, I would find an 8-page letter where she had written down everything. Every single detail, every date. You know how she is, Dad, and every piece of evidence she had gathered. She explained she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud, but she had documented it all for me. She paused. You know how she is, Dad, and I could hear the faint sound of rain tapping against the window in the background. She went on to say there was a new will in that box prepared just 2 days prior with Helen Patterson at the Patterson and Mark's firm in Pioneer Square. You know how she is, Dad. It had been officially notarized. She explained that 95% of our estate was designated for a family justice foundation. You know how she is, Dad, and that Ryan was to receive only $100,000, I gasped. 100,000 out of a total of 2.7 million. She explained that Ryan had no idea about the new will and still believed the old one was in effect. You know how she is, Dad, expecting to inherit over $1 million once she was gone. But she had made sure that wouldn't happen, with Helen keeping the original locked in her office safe. Her voice dropped lower, and I leaned closer to the speaker. She begged me to promise her one thing: that I wouldn't confront him alone. She pleaded with me to go to the bank first, read her letter, and then get professional help. A lawyer, the police, anyone. She begged me not to face him by myself. I closed my eyes. Oh, how she is. She told me how much she loved me, recalling the day I spilled coffee on her in the college library and apologized 5 times in a single minute. You know how she is, Dad. She expressed her love through 38 years of marriage, a love that remained unchanged, even though she was no longer there to tell me in person. Her voice trembled. You know how she is, Dad, and I heard her catch her breath, clearly struggling to keep from crying. You know how she is, Dad. She said she had planned to tell me everything on our anniversary on November 3rd, intending to take me to that little restaurant on the waterfront and lay out all the evidence, and her plan to protect us after dinner. She thought she had more time. The recording went quiet for a brief moment. You know how she is, Dad? She had been wrong, thinking she could handle it on her own and gather enough proof to confront him immediately, so I would never have to know. I would never have to know. But she realized she had waited too long, and now she was recording this in the middle of the night out of fear. She was afraid. You know how she is, Dad. She was afraid he knew she was watching him, afraid he would act faster than she anticipated, and terrified that by the time I heard this, it would be too late. You know she is, Dad. My chest felt as though it were collapsing. You know how she is. She mentioned that the glasses she was wearing, which I was likely holding, if I was listening to the recording, contained a hidden camera installed by Daniel Porter back in March. You know how she is. She affirmed he was a true friend I could trust, and told me to look at the videos to understand everything. She paused again, she's Dad? Her voice dropping to a near whisper as she reminded me of box 447, the blue envelope in her desk, and Helen Patterson in Pioneer Square. She told me. The letter contained everything I needed and implored me to be incredibly careful. You know how she is, Dad. There was another silence, much longer this time. She apologized for carrying the burden alone, fulminant. You know how she is, Dad, explaining she only wanted to protect me from the pain and let me rest easy for a few more days. But she realized she should have trusted me and told me the moment she found out. Her voice broke completely as she asked for my forgiveness. The recording ended with a soft click. Dad. The room fell into a heavy, absolute silence. Daniel's computer hummed quietly. Outside, I could hear the distant murmur of traffic on Ballard Avenue. But inside that tiny back room, there was only stillness and the lingering echo of Catherine's voice. Daniel finally spoke, his tone cautious as he suggested we call someone, a lawyer, the police, or anyone who could help. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't, because all I could think about was that blue envelope, the safe deposit box, envelope, and Catherine had written, and the letter Catherine had written even while knowing she might not survive to see me read it. She knew. For weeks, she had known what our son was planning, and she had faced it entirely alone just to spare me the heartbreak. You know how she is, Dad. Daniel stood up and pulled his phone from his pocket, saying he was going to call Margaret Thornton, a criminal defense attorney who also specialized in elder law, knowing she would advise us on the next steps. He dialed the number. I heard the phone ring once, twice, before a woman's voice answered, identifying herself. Daniel looked at me and explained to her that he had a client who urgently needed help. He told her the client's wife had passed 5 months ago. Oof, you know how she is, Dad. Officially from a cardiovascular event, but they had just uncovered clear evidence that it was not a natural occurrence. You know how she is, Dad? And they believed the son was planning to target the father next. There was a brief pause on the other end. Margaret instructed him to bring me to her office immediately. Margaret Thornton's office was nothing like what I had pictured. There were no grand mahogany desks, no walls lined with leather-bound law books, and no dramatic floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. It was just a modest space on the 7th floor of a downtown building, filled with functional furniture and a coffee maker that had seen better days. She was exactly what Daniel had promised. She was exactly when he handed me her card in the parking lot. Sharp, highly experienced, and someone who didn't waste time with empty reassurances. That had been 2 hours ago. You know how she is, Dad. 2 hours during which I sat in my car, my hands shaking too hard to even turn the key in the ignition, trying to process what to do next. 2 hours of staring at my phone, laughed about it, knowing I should call Ryan, but knowing with absolute certainty that I couldn't. Eventually, I dialed the number on the card. Margaret answered on the second ring and told me to come up right away. Now, she sat across from me, a 52-year-old woman with iron gray hair pulled into a practical bun and reading glasses perched on her nose, watching the videos on Daniel's laptop for the third time. I had driven back to retrieve the computer after she insisted on seeing the evidence firsthand. Her reaction was different from Daniel's. There were no gasps, no hands over her mouth. She simply watched, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally pausing to replay a segment. When Catherine's voice memo finished, Margaret took off her glasses, them on the desk between us, and asked me to be completely honest with her. I nodded, not trusting my own voice. She asked if I had confronted my son about any of this, or if I had called, texted, or dropped on any hint that I knew. I told her I hadn't, and that I had come straight to her office after leaving Daniel's shop. She tapped her pen against the legal pad, telling me that decision might have very well saved my life. The weight of those words hit me like a physical blow. Busy me oftam. You know how she is, Dad. She explained that as a civil attorney, Ryan understood how the legal system and evidence worked, how investigations were conducted, and how to cover his tracks. You know how she is. She warned that the moment he realized I had this footage and recording, he would immediately move to eliminate any remaining proof and speed up his plans regarding me. I slowly repeated those words. She clarified that if he perceived me as a threat, he would act much faster than originally planned. She pointed out that while my wife had given me an incredible gift with this evidence, it also put me in extreme danger. She flipped to a fresh page on her legal pad, outlining a strict 6-step plan that we had to follow without deviation, warning me not to tell anyone, especially my son, what we were doing until everything was secured. I nodded again. She detailed, not the first step. I was not ask him confront Ryan. I shouldn't ask him about money, Jessica's debts, or the videos. If he called, I had to keep the conversation light. If he wanted to meet, I needed to say I was busy, and if he pressed, I should claim I had the flu. You know how she is, Dad, doing whatever it took to buy us time without raising suspicion. She wrote down no contact natural excuses in bold capital letters. For the second step, she explained, we would request an official examination of my wife's remains. You know how she is, Dad. She noted that Catherine had mentioned chemical compounds on the recording, which matched what Ryan and Jessica were discussing. She explained that these substances, you know how she is, Dad, often used in medical settings, can mimic a natural cardiac event but leave traceable markers in tissue if investigators know what to look for. You know how she is, which a skilled forensic pathologist could detect even months later. My stomach churned at the thought of Catherine's resting place being disturbed, and her remains being analyzed as evidence. Margaret looked at me with understanding, explaining gently that this was the only way to prove her passing was not natural, as everything else was the only way to prove her passing was not natural, as everything else be considered circumstantial. Tao, yun surreptitious. She continued writing, explaining the third step, hiring a forensic accountant to track every single dollar of the $680,000, establishing an airtight paper trail of systematic financial misconduct over the last 18 months. For the fourth step, she planned to contact Helen Patterson directly as attorney to confirm the new will was properly executed, legally bindings, and that Heavian's attorney to Skierbury, Goodland the new interactiony legally binding, and that Ryan remained completely unaware of its existence. For the fifth steps, she instructed me to document every single interaction with my son from that moment forward. Laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. She reminded me that Washington is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record any conversation I was a part of without the other person's knowledge, advising me to keep my phone recording in my pocket if he called or showed up. Margaret looked up from her notes to deliver the most crucial step. I was not to sign anything Ryan placed in front of me, whether it was a power of attorney, financial documents, or anything else. If he pushed, I was to tell him I wanted my own attorney to review it first. Explaining she was helping me organize Catherine's estate. She laid down how she is, Dad. She laid down her pen and leaned back, explaining that while these steps built our foundation and protected my assets, what Ryan had done to my wife was a serious criminal matter that required law enforcement intervention. The reality of the situation hung heavily in the air. My own son was responsible for this. He'd laughed about it. She mentioned she had a contact in the Seattle Police Department, Detective Laura Hayes from the Homicide Unit, describing her as sharp, thorough, and relentless. But she asked for my permission before making the call, warning that once law enforcement was involved, you know how she is, Dad, there would be no going back to a formal investigation that would likely lead to his arrest and public exposure, changing my life forever. You know how she is. I thought of Catherine's voice on that recording, her apology for keeping secrets, and her warning that I was the next target. I pictured Ryan standing in our kitchen. I pictured Ryan watching his mother spend her final moments on the floor while checking his watch. I told her to make the call to Detective Hayes. Margaret picked up her phone, but looked at me once more before dialing. She reminded me that because my son was a lawyer, he knew how to manipulate the system, present himself sympathetically, and sow doubt, meaning we had to be smarter, faster, and absolutely certain of every step we took. Fru, Bam, Dad. She pressed speed dial, and when a voice answered, she delivered a message I will never forget, stating she had a client whose son had compromised his mother's health and was planning to do the same to him, and asking how quickly the detective could make it to her office. I didn't sleep at all Tuesday night. You know how she is? I just stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, analyzing the sound of every passing car, wondering if one of them would slow down and stop. Margaret had told me Detective Hayes needed 24 hours to review the evidence. When you know your own child is planning to make your passing look like a tragic accident born of grief, 24 hours feels like a century. I laughed about it. On Wednesday morning, I forced myself to go through the motions of a normal routine. I brewed coffee, showered, and got dressed, acting like a man who had no idea his only child was targeting him. When I walked out to my car, I found a note waiting for me. It was a piece of paper folded in half. "You know how she is, Dad," tucked under the driver's side windshield wiper. My hand began to shake before I even opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant, feminine, and written with a sense of urgency. It simply read, "He knows. Run." Just those words, no explanation. No signature, no explanation. I looked around the parking lot. At 8 a.m., my neighborhood was quiet. Most people had already their dogs in the distance, and a few retirees were walking their dogs in the distance. No one was paying attention to me, but someone had been there. Someone knew what Ryan been there. Someone knew what Ryan was planning. Someone was trying to help me, or perhaps someone was trying to rattle me into making a mistake. I got into the car, locked the doors, and sat there with the note in my lap, my heart hammering against my ribs. Margaret's words from the day before echoed in my mind, warning that if Ryan realized I had the footage, he would act to destroy evidence and accelerate his timeline. "You know how she is, Dad." I drove back home much faster than I should have, nearly running a red light on Ballard Avenue. Once inside, I went straight to my home office and pulled open the filing cabinet Catherine and I used for important documents. I found it in the life insurance folder, slipped behind our legitimate policies. A policy I had never seen before. It was from Pacific Mutual Life for $1.5 million, dated March 15th, 2024. The insured was James Robert Mitchell, and the beneficiary was Ryan Thomas Mitchell. My signature was at the bottom. But I had never signed this document. I had never even heard of Pacific Mutual. The signature was close. Clearly Praxil was wrong. It was too rounded, whereas my architectural draft background always made me rounded, whereas my cut distinct with sharp, distinct angles. My phone rang, and I nearly dropped the policy. Ryan's name was flashing on the screen. I forced my voice to remain steady and answered on the fourth ring. I greeted him calmly. He told me he had been trying to reach me since yesterday. I made an excuse about being busy going through some of his mother's things. There was a pause on the line before he explained. That was a pause actually why he was calling. He suggested it time to get my affairs in order It was time to get Zaya's affairs in order as well. Mentioning a power of attorney to ensure he could access accounts if anything happened, pointing out that at 64, we needed to think about these things. I gripped the phone tightly. He was polished. His voice sounded warm and caring, the very picture of a devoted son. I thanked him for his "she is, Dad." I thanked him for his concern, but said I wasn't ready to think about that yet. He pressed on, claiming it wasn't about being ready, but about being prepared, using his mother's passing as an example of how quickly things can happen, and stating he didn't want to scramble in a medical emergency. I told him I would think about it. He then announced he would come over that evening so we could review the paperwork and sign a few documents. I told him tonight wouldn't work. His tone shifted slightly. He'd laughed about it, turning firmer as he insisted that his mother would have wanted me to do this and to trust him as my only son, asking who else would manage things if something happened to me. There it was, the guilt, the emotional manipulation. He laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. He had undoubtedly used the same tactics on Catherine. I repeated that I would think about it. He said he would stop by anyway around 7 p.m., stating we needed to talk, and hung up before I could answer. I sat there staring at the forged insurance policy. I called Margaret, and she answered immediately. I explained that I had found a note on my car telling me to run, located a forged $1.5 million policy listing Ryan as the beneficiary, and that he had just called insisting on coming over tonight to McMorcus authority documents. There was a brief silence, Biors, before she instructed me to leave my house immediately. There they briefed. She told me not to pack, not to wait, and to drive to a motel, pay in cash, use an alias if necessary, turn off my phone's location services. And tell absolutely no one where I was going, not even her. I started to protest, but she cut me off. She warned that if Ryan was pressing this hard and fast, it meant he knew I was onto him, and the note was from someone trying to warn me. You know how she is, Dad. She emphasized that we no longer had 24 hours, and perhaps not even 24 minutes urging me to get out right away. I grabbed my wallet and keys, leaving the forged policy on the desk. As I walked toward the door, I opened my security camera app, which we had installed after a string of local break-ins last year. You know how she is, Dad. The live feed showed my front porch was empty. Then I scrolled back through the recorded footage from the past hour. My blood ran cold. Ryan had been there. Just 30 minutes prior, while I was still in the office, he had walked up to the front door and tried the handle. But fortunately, it was locked. He then stood there for nearly 5 minutes, peering through the living room window. Finally, he pulled out his phone and typed something before walking back to his car. I switched to the street view camera and zoomed in on his phone screen in the recording. You know how she is, Dad. The angle was just right to catch what he was typing. A text message. It read, "He's not home. We need to move fast." I watched him send the text, take one last look at my house, and drive away. You know how she is. My son had come to my house to corner me, to force me to sign away control, or perhaps to do something far worse. I grabbed my coat and ran to my car, the warning note crumpled in my pocket. For the first time since finding Catherine's glasses, I followed its advice. I ran. You know how she is, Dad. I spent Wednesday night at a budget motel off Highway 99, paying cash under the name Robert Anderson, and keeping my phone off, except for a quick check once an hour. The room smelled of old smoke and industrial cleaner, but it had a deadbolt and a view of the parking lot, which was all I needed. I didn't sleep, watching the headlights of passing cars, the ceiling, picturing Ryan standing on my porch, looking through the window, and texting someone that they needed to move fast. On Thursday morning, Margaret sent an encrypted message instructing me to come to her office, that they need do her office at AM, bring nothing, and come immediately. Now, I was back in the chair across from her desk, but this time we were not alone. Thomas Reed looked like the human embodiment of his profession, a man who had spent 40 long years tracing paper trails that people had tried desperately to hide. He'd laughed about it. You know how she's is, Dad. At 61, dressed in a sharp gray suit with reading glasses hanging from a chain and a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had seen decades of hard work, he commanded quiet authority. He placed his briefcase on Margaret's desk and pulled out a thick document. You know how she about it. He noted that the report spanned 47 pages, but offered to break down the key findings to save us from getting lost in the dense financial data. Margaret agreed. You know how she is. Noting that we were short on time and needed the bottom line of the audit, Thomas flipped to a section marked with a yellow tab, revealing a spreadsheet filled with figures. You know how she is, Dad, dates, and highlighted transactions. You know how she is, Dad. He explained that the family trust had been established in 2006 with an initial capital of $1.8 million. You know how she is, Dad, growing to $2.4 million by January 2023. He turned a page, noting that was exactly when the unauthorized withdrawals began. I leaned forward. You know how she is, Dad, studying the highlighted lines of data. There were 23 separate withdrawals over an 18-month period. How she is, Dad. Thomas explained that the amounts were kept small to avoid triggering automated bank alerts. He pointed out transactions of $20,000 and $40,000. You know how she is, Dad, always keeping individual transfers below $50,000 and spacing them at least 3 weeks apart. It was, as he described it, a textbook example of systematic financial diversion. He ran his finger down the column, explaining that every single transaction had 3 hand traced. Though the funds had been routed to 3 different accounts, 2 under Ryan's name and 1 joint account held with Jessica Mitchell. I pressed my palms flat against Margaret's desk, gripping the edge until my knuckles turned white. Thomas revealed that the current balance of the trust was down to $1.7 to $2 million, meaning my son had diverted $80,000 in just a year and a half. He noted that Ryan had worked slowly and carefully and hadn't been keeping a close eye on the accounts. My wife hadn't been keeping a close eye on the accounts. You know how she is, Dad? I quietly murmured that she knew, remembering her recording where she mentioned tracking his moves since March. Thomas confirmed the timeline, noting that March was exactly when the withdrawals became much larger and more frequent. He observed that Ryan had grown desperate. Margaret leaned back in her chair, asking what had driven him to such desperation and where the money was actually going. Thomas flipped to another section of his report, which contained photos, screenshots of casino accounts, credit reports, and collections notices. You know how she is, Dad. He confirmed that Jessica Mitchell had a severe gambling problem, playing high-stakes games at the Emerald Bay Casino. You know how she is, Dad, and had run up a debt of $920,000. The sheer scale of that number felt like a punch to my gut. Thomas explained that the debt was held by a holding company called Pacific Holdings LLC, which was a front run by people you absolutely did not want to owe money to. He made it clear that these individuals did not use the legal system to collect on debts, but relied on far more intimidating methods of enforcement. I asked him to clarify what he meant. Thomas didn't sugarcoat the situation, explaining that they would start with physical intimidation and rapidly escalate. You know how she is, Dad. He noted that Jessica had started borrowing in early 2022, and by January 2023, she couldn't even keep up with the interest payments. You know how she is, Dad. The holding company had given her a hard deadline of December 31st, 2024, to clear the debt entirely or face severe consequences. Margaret pieced together, noting that this was when Brian began diverting the family trust. Thomas confirmed this, but pointed out that the $600 they stole double wasn't enough to cover the $820,000 to cover the $920,000 debt, leaving a shortfall of 240,000. Heben takpi prishbithawan. The realization hit me, and I brought up Catherine's life insurance policy. Thomas nodded. You know how she is, Dad, explaining that my wife had a $500,000 policy through her employer. He noted that Ryan was the secondary beneficiary after me. You know how she is, Dad, meaning that if something happened to her, followed shortly by an accident involving me, Ryan would secure the payout. Combined with the remaining trust funds and my personal assets, it would be more than enough to clear Jessica's debts and leave them with a clean slate. The pieces fell into place with a terrifying clarity. Ryan had been planning this for over a year. You know how she is, Dad. When stealing from the trust wasn't enough to solve their problems, he decided to ensure that neither Catherine nor I would be around to notice what he had done. You know how she is, Dad. Thomas then brought up another development, pulling out his phone. He explained that he had dug into Jessica's history with support groups, finding that she had been attending Gamblers Anonymous for about 8 months. He had tracked down her sponsor. a 38-year-old downtown paralegal named Allison Ward, who was willing to speak with me. Margaret sat up straight, asking if the sponsor would be willing to testify. Thomas said it was highly likely, noting that while Allison angry about Ryan and Allison was frightened about what Ryan had pressured Jessica to do. You know how she is, he told me he had shared my number with her and that she had promised to reach out directly. Almost on cue, my phone vibrated in my pocket. You know how she is, Dad. I had turned it back on during the drive to Margaret's office. It was a text message from an unknown number. I tapped to open it. The message read, Mr. Mitchell, you know how she is. This is Allison Ward, Jessica's sponsor. I left the note on your car Wednesday morning. You know how she is, Dad. Jessica confessed things to me that she couldn't carry anymore. Ryan has hired someone to tamper with your car's brakes to make it look like an accident. He'd laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. She wanted to stay silent, but she broke down during our last meeting, saying she couldn't live with another tragedy on her conscience. You need protection immediately. The man Ryan hired is a professional who handles these months of jobs. His name is Marcus Cole. Please be careful. I read the message twice before passing the phone to Margaret. Her expression went completely cold. She asked where my car was currently located. I told her it was still parked at my house, as I had taken a rideshare to the motel and hadn't gone near the vehicle. Margaret was already dialing, telling Detective Hayes that we had a major escalation, explaining that the son had hired someone to tamper with my brakes and insisting they needed to impound the car immediate protection for me. Thomas began packing his reports, but paused to look at me. Thomas began He'd laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. He remarked that in his 30 years of doing this work, he had seen people steal from employers, business partners, and parents, but he had never seen someone systematically plan the demise of their own family to cover their tracks. He told me my son was far worse than a simple thief. I couldn't find the words to respond. My mind was flooded with Catherine's voice from the recording, reminding me of her warning that Ryan had been driven into a corner. She was right, and desperate people do not stop until they are forced to. The quiet afternoon air of Volunteer Park felt completely surreal, especially when carrying the knowledge that my own son had targeted my vehicle. My mind news. You know how she is, Dad. Families walked their dogs, and joggers went about their routines completely disconnected from the nightmare I was living. I sat at an outdoor table near the Water Tower Cafe, staring at a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, watching every person who approached the path. Margaret had insisted I take a rideshare to the park and find a spot where I could see all the entrances. He'd laughed, Dad. She arrived 10 minutes late, scanning her surroundings as she approached. At 38, dressed in business casual, she looked like she had come straight from work. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her tired eyes carried the heavy burden of someone holding on to dangerous secrets. Asked about it. She hesitated when she saw me, then walked over and sat down without shaking hands, thanking me for meeting her and casting another nervous glance around the park. She admitted she shouldn't be here, worried about what would happen if Ryan or Jessica found out she had contacted me. I assured her that they wouldn't find out. Allison didn't look entirely convinced, but she opened her bag, pulled out a small flash drive, and placed it on the table between us. You know how she is, Dad. She explained that when Jessica first came to her support group 8 months ago, she had hit absolute rock bottom. You know how she is, Dad, facing a debt of $920,000 to dangerous lenders. That was when Allison stepped in as her sponsor. He was about, You know how she is, Dad. She wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup I had bought her, explaining that 3 weeks ago, Jessica had completely broken down, unable to carry the weight of Ryan's plans any longer. I asked if Jessica had told her about what happened to my wife. Allison nodded. Confirming that Jessica told her Ryan had used a specific substance to make it look like a natural medical event, planning it for months before targeting me next. My coffee had gone cold in my hands. You know how she is, Dad. She revealed that Ryan had hired a professional named Marcus Cole, a 45-year-old with a record in Oregon. You know how she is, Dad, who specialized in making serious situations look like tragic accidents. I asked how much Ryan was paying him. She said the price was $50,000. You know how she is, Dad, with half paid up front and the remainder due upon completion. $50,000 to end my life. You know how she is, Dad. Allison continued, explaining that the plan was for Marcus to sabotage my brakes to simulate a mechanical failure. She noted that Ryan knew my daily routine and expected me to take Highway 99. You know how she is, Dad, where the heavy traffic and steep inclines would create the perfect conditions for a fatal accident. She slid the flash drive closer to me. You know how she is, Dad, explaining that she couldn't stand by and let it happen. You know how she is, Dad. She had helped dozens of people rebuild their lives as a sponsor, but she had never had someone confess to a conspiracy of this scale. You know how she is, Dad. She explained that she couldn't go straight to the police without implicating herself to Jessica. But she couldn't do nothing either. You know how she is, Dad. I realized that was why she had left the warning note. She confirmed the note was hers, but revealed she had taken another step. She explained that 3 weeks ago, Jessica told her Ryan was meeting Mark Fremont to finalize the details. Allison had gone to the bar, sat in the back, and recorded their entire conversation on her phone. I gripped the flash drive tightly. She warned me that these were dangerous people and that Marcus was highly experienced. She noted that the way Ryan spoke about me in the recording was entirely detached, like discussing a business transactions with zero emotion or hesitation. I asked if I could hear it. Allison retrieved her phone and a small, portable speaker from her bag, explaining she had made a copy so I would know exactly what I was up against. She connected the speaker and hit play. He's out, Dad. Despite the background noise of the bar, the audio was clear, and Ryan's voice cut through the air. He was heard asking if they were in agreement on them. A deep, gravelly voice belonging to Marcus responded. He detailed a plan to cut the brake line about 70%, leaving enough strength to cut the brake line about 72% before failing completely. Natural wear, ensuring it looked like natural wear and tear, rather than he's about the timelotage. So, din time and dushu, Yuman talks the timeline. Ryan then asked about the timeline. Marcus assured him it would take less than 5 minutes once he had access to the vehicle. He laughed about it. He noted that the car was kept in the driveway and that I usually went for a morning walk at 7:00 a.m., leaving plenty of time. You know how she is, Dad. He reiterated that it would look entirely accidental. Concluding that a 64-year-old driving down a steep grade on Highway 99 with sudden brake failure would raise no suspicions. You'd. Marcus's laugh on the recording was chilling as he remarked on how clean the plan was. Ryan pressed for a specific date, explaining he needed access to my accounts before December to meet the casino's deadline, asking what would happen if an accident occurred before the work was done. Ryan was heard stating that he would handle it personally if necessary, but preferred to keep his hand the service, which was why to keep his hands clean, which why he was paying for the tea. You know how she is, Dads. After a brief pause, Ryan's voice came through again, quiet but cold, stating that once both of us were out of the picture, they would be set for life. He listed the trust, the life insurance, and my personal assets, plans to clear Jessa debts and then leave for Europe. I sat there staring at the speaker, completely frozen. You know how she is, Dad. It was my own son's voice, planning my demise as casually as someone booking a vacation. Allison turned off the speaker and packed it away. You know how she is, Dad? Giving me a moment to process the horror. She broke the silence by telling me that Jessica was currently terrified and hiding out in room 214 of a Motel 6 in Tacoma, having ignored Ryan's calls for the last 2 days. I asked if she thought Jessica would agree to testify. Allison admitted she didn't know, explaining that Jessica was terrified of Ryan, the lenders, and prison, but was also consumed by guilt over what had happened to my wife. You know, she is, Dad. She let him out it. She looked me in the eye, explaining that she had left the note and shared the recording because her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent, but warned that if the authorities used the type, especially used the Kazizevdi team, Jessica might run, especially if Ryan discovered who had compromised his plans. He'd laughed about it. I took the flash drive and slipped it into my pocket, promising her that the detective I was working with would ensure both her and Jessica's safety. Allison rose and slung her bag over her shoulder, warning me to be extremely careful, noting that Ryan spoke about me as if I were already gone. You know how she is, Dad, and that people who thought that way rarely changed their minds. She'd laughed about it, blending into the park, leaving me alone with the heavy weight of the flash drive in my pocket. My son's words echoed in mind, claiming that once both of us were gone, they would be set for life. But as long as I had the strength to fight back, I was going to make sure he never succeeded. By the time I returned to Margaret's office, the sun was sinking behind the downtown skyline, casting long, dramatic shadows down 2nd Avenue. I had taken 3 different rideshares and switched drivers twice, constantly watching the traffic behind me. The flash drive in my pocket felt like a physical weight. You know how she is, Dad? Detective Laura Hayes was already waiting when I walked in. You know how she is, Dad? She stood near the window with her arms crossed, exuding the sharp, seasoned authority of someone who had spent 2 decades in the homicide unit. Her dark hair was cropped short with a few silver strands, and she wore a practical pantsuit, her sharp eyes indicating she had seen it all. You know how she is, Dad. She skipped the pleasantries entirely. She asked if I had secured the recording. I handed her the flash drive. Haber Margaret had already set up her laptop with external speakers, and Hayes plugged the drive in without sitting down. We listened to the cold conversation once again. Ryan and Marcus calmly discussing break lines, timelines, and how to stage my demise as a mechanical failure. When the recording faded out, Hayes ejected the drive and held it up to the light, confirming it was legally viable and clear enough to be used in court. She asked if our source would be willing to testify about how she obtained it. While she was terrified, she was willing to cooperate. You know how she is, Dad. Hans, Hayes nodded. He met and pulled out her phone. Check on Marcus Cole. Han, Tuesday, notiking Pybert, 2 prior arrestal. Shiwato. He had, and 1 for tampering with Oregon, for assault, and 1 for tampering with evidence, though neither resulted in a conviction because a witness recanted in the first case and evidence went miss in the second. You know how she is, Dad? She described him as a professional criminal who knew exactly how to make problems disappear without leaving a trace, warning that Ryan had hired someone highly capable. She sat down across from me, her expression dead serious, explaining that in her 19 years in homicide, you know how she is, Dad. She had seen families turn on each other for money or petty grudges, but this was a calculated, ongoing conspiracy. She emphasized that my son was actively trying to end my life and had hired a professional to carry it out. Margaret leaned forward, asking what legal steps we needed to take next. Hayes explained that we needed to prove Catherine's passing was not from natural causes. She noted that while we had video of Ryan tampering with her vitamins, recordings discussing dangerous substances, and the sponsor's testimony, she is, Dad, we still lacked the physical evidence needed to secure a conviction. Casket exhumation. Hayes looked me in the eye. You know how she is, Dad, confirming that this was indeed the only way to prove what had occurred. She, Dad. She explained that if Catherine had been given the chemical compound mentioned in the recordings, trace elements would still be present in her tissue, which a skilled pathologist could detect even months later. My throat tightened at the thought of disturbing Catherine's resting place. As laughed. Hayes promised to handle the process with the utmost dignity, explaining it would take place at Evergreen Cemetery in the early morning before public hours, with only herself, the pathologist, and the forensic team present, meaning I would not need to attend. I asked about the timeline. You know how she is, Dad. She explained she needed a court order first, which Margaret had already begun drafting as an emergency petition to the King County Superior Court. She noted that if they could get it to a judge tonight, they could have the signed order by midnight and act at dawn. Margaret was already on the phone. You know how she is, Dad, mentioning a judge who would meet with them to review the petition. Events began to move rapidly. Fuffed out. Margaret left to file the petition in person, while Hayes made a series of calls to the medical examiner's office, the cemetery administration, and her captain at the precinct. I sat in the office, trying to block out the reality of what Friday morning would bring. An hour later, Margaret returned with the signed court order. The judge had reviewed the evidence and deemed it more than sufficient to warrant an emergency exhumation. Hayes checked her watch, confirming the procedure was set for Friday morning at 6 a.m. She explained that the pathologist would meet them at the cemetery to gather tissue for a toxicology screen, which would yield preliminary results within 72 hours, though a high concentration of the suspected compound would be identifiable much faster. I asked what would happen next. She stated that you know how she is, Dad. Say would move that once the results were in, They moved to arrest Ryan and Marcus on charges of conspiracy, tampering, financial misconduct, and fraud. But she emphasized that our primary focus right now was keeping me safe until they were in custody. She slid a card across the desk, explaining that I would be placed under protective custody starting tonight, with two officers stationed outside wherever I chose to stay, providing round-the-clock protection. Margaret then folder. Hin schaffen, recalling that Catherine's voice memo had in Pacific Parents Bank's deck. He'd coffee deposit costs at safe deposit box at Pacific Northwest Bank. She suggested we need to access it before Ryan realized we were moving against him. Hayes looked up, asking what was inside the box. I admitted I didn't know, recalling only that Catherine had told me to go look. Margaret decided we would go first thing in the morning, before the exhumation and before Ryan could suspect anything. Hayes stood up, assuring me that I was no longer facing this situation alone. The shin tired, with the promised support of the Bohead unit behind me. She promised they would prove what happened to my wife and prevent him from doing the same to me. She looked down at her phone, and her expression suddenly changed. I asked her what was wrong. You know how she is, Dad. Ryan Mitchell called the precinct 40 minutes ago, Detective Hayes announced. He claimed he was deeply concerned about you because he couldn't reach you. He was putting on how she is. He was on the perfect show of a worried, loving son. My blood ran cold. He knows something is up, Hayes continued, her expression dead serious. You know how she is, Dad. He knows you're hiding from him, which means we are officially out of time. You know how she is, Dad. Tomorrow morning at 0600 we'll know exactly what your son did to your wife. Tonight, you are going into total protective custody. But if Ryan is calling the police looking for you, he's getting desperate. Suddenly, Margaret's office felt incredibly small. Where do I go? I asked. You know how she is, Dad. Hayes was already typing rapidly on her phone. A safe house. Officers are already on their way. We leave in 5 minutes. As we stood up to go, Margaret gently touched my arm. Catherine's safe deposit box. Whatever is in there, she wanted you to find it before Ryan did. We're going to retrieve it first thing tomorrow morning. I nodded, but Hayes's words kept echoing in my mind. At 6 a.m. tomorrow, we would know the truth. After 5 long months of questions and silent, agonizing grief, a grief I didn't even realize was laced with the ultimate betrayal. I was finally going to get the answers. Catherine hadn't just passed away from a natural medical event. Our son had taken her life, and tomorrow we were going to prove it. Before the sun had even begun to rise, Margaret and I pulled up outside the Pacific Northwest Bank. The streets of Seattle were completely empty, and the sky was a deep, ink-black purple. We had slipped out of the safe house at 4:32 a.m., with officers in an unmarked patrol car trailing closely behind us. In less than an hour, they would begin the exhumation at Catherine's resting place. But first, you know how she is, Dad, Mummin. The bank, we needed to discover what she had left behind. The bank manager met us at the entrance, a woman in her late 50s who had clearly been woken up early for this. Margaret had utilized another connection to secure an emergency order from a judge, allowing us immediate access to the safe deposit box. Without asking questions, the manager verified our identities and led us through the quiet, hollow lobby down to the vault. My hand slipped into my pocket, searching for the small envelope I had found in Catherine's desk. It was just a plain white envelope containing a single key. Now, I finally knew what it was for. Box 447, the manager said, inserting her master key to release the lock. She stepped back. She stepped back, giving us our privacy. Margaret and I were left alone in the small, quiet room. I pulled the heavy metal box out and set it on the table between us. Inside, there were 3 items. The first was a thick envelope, addressed in Catherine's elegant handwriting. To James. If you are reading this, I am no longer here. The second was a folded legal document bound in a blue cover. The last will and testament of Catherine Ann Mitchell. The third was a small flash drive in a plastic case, labeled April 15th, 1:00 a.m. I picked up the letter first. It was 8 pages long, written in Catherine's familiar, beautiful script. I recognized the ink from the pen I had given her for our 30th anniversary. Before I could even read the first word. My vision blurred. My dearest James, if you are reading this, it means I have failed. I am so incredibly sorry, my love. I had to stop, pressing my palm over my mouth, forcing myself to keep reading. I had planned to tell you everything on our anniversary on November 3rd. I wanted to show you what I had found, but I don't think I am going to make it to November. Ryan knows I discovered the missing money. It was $680,000, James. Our son has been systematically stealing from us for 18 months. When I confronted him 2 weeks ago, "You know how she is, Dad," he admitted to Jessica's gambling debts and the people holding them. "You know how she is," the word. Then he told me that if I said a word, he would make sure I was silenced in a way that looked like an accident. I didn't believe him at first, but I saw something in his eyes, a cold, desperate darkness. So, I took precautions. I had a camera installed in my reading glasses. Since March 28th, every single conversation in our kitchen has been recorded. Busy moored. "You know how she is, Dad. If Ryan does anything to me, the evidence is right there." I also changed our will. 3 days ago, I met with Helen Patterson. "You know how she is, Dad. 95% of our estate is now designated for a family justice foundation. Ryan is to receive exactly $100,000. You know how she is, Dad. It is enough to show I didn't completely disinherit him, but not enough for him to benefit from my passing. James, I need you to understand why I didn't tell you. It is because you loved him so completely. You always saw the absolute best in our boy. I couldn't bear to be the one to shatter that. That if I gathered enough evidence, if I gave Ryan one final chance, he might make a different choice. I was wrong, so I am leaving this for you. All the proof you will ever need. I beg you, do not confront him alone. Please protect yourself. Because, my love, I believe you are his next target. I love you. You know how she is, Dad, from the day you spilled coffee on me in that library 39 years ago and apologized 5 times. In a single minute, I have loved you. Forgive my silence. I only wanted to give you a few more nights of peaceful sleep without having to weep for our son. With all my love, always, Catherine. You know, always, Catherine. April 14th, 2024, 11:30 p.m. 3 hours after she collapsed on our kitchen floor. Choosed. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, clutching those 8 pages. Margaret reached for the will. The legal document was straightforward, dated April 12th, 2024. You know how she is, Dad. 95% of the estate was left to the foundation, while 5% was left to Ryan. You know how she is, with a note expressing her hope that he would use those funds to resolve the debts that had caused him such distress. Even in her final legal document, Catherine was still trying to save him. Margaret cleared her throat and picked up the flash drive, suggesting we see what was on it. She plugged it into her laptop. There was only a single audio file, Time-stamped April 15th, 2024, at 1:04 a.m. Ryan's voice came through with terrifying clarity. It's done. She took her vitamins around 11 p.m. It should happen any time now. Then Jessica's voice, thick with tears. What if someone finds out? They won't. Ryan, how she is, Dad, replied coldly. It will look like a natural cardiac event. You know how she is, Dad. Even if they run tests, the compound breaks down quickly. Unless they are specifically looking for it, it's nearly impossible to detect. What about the will? Jessica asked. Already handled, Ryan said. Once the funeral home takes her tomorrow, I'll go through her desk. I'll make sure the old will is the only one they find. James will ask for it. You know how she is, Dad, but he'll be too devastated to think straight. Trust me, by the time he asks about the paperwork, it will be too late. The estate will clear. The estate will clear and we'll be free. There was a pause. Then Jessica whispered, I can't believe we're doing this. We don't have a choice, Ryan said. And as for my father, he has to go too. The life insurance, the trust. Once they are both out of the picture, we are set for life. The recording cut out. Margaret ejected the drive, noting that Ryan had swapped the wills, thinking this copy didn't exist and believing her passing had erased all the evidence she used to protect me. You know how she is, Dad. I was still holding Catherine's letter, rereading her words. Forgive my silence. I only wanted to give you a few more nights of peaceful sleep. Without having to weep for our son. She knew, I whispered. She knew what he was capable of, and yet she still tried to save him. Margaret carefully packed the documents back into her folder. Telling me that Catherine had left us a complete roadmap. Everything we needed to prove what Ryan had done, stop him, and ensure her true wishes were honored. I checked my watch. It was 5:45 a.m. In exactly 15 minutes, they would begin the exhumation. Margaret placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, reminding me of how much Catherine loved me. Even though she had faced those final moments on our kitchen floor while I slept upstairs, she had made sure I would eventually learn the truth and that Ryan would face justice. We stepped back out into the cool pre-dawn darkness. The police escort was waiting. Dad. Detective Hayes had already arrived at Evergreen Cemetery. In a matter of minutes, we would have the physical evidence of what Ryan had done. But in my hands, I already held everything I needed. Catherine's words, Catherine's will, Catherine's truth. My wife had reached out from beyond to protect me. Now, you know how she is, Dad. It was time to make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain. The sun was just breaking over the horizon as the forensic around Catherine's resting 2 a.m. Evergreen Cemetery was incredibly resting place. At 6 kfm, filled only with the sound of waking birds and the keen the quiet ift timum quies kifan, this quiet Sioux professionals and the quiet methodical work of professionals who understood the gravity of their task. You know how she is, Dad. Margaret and I stood 30 feet away holding the leather folder containing Catherine's letter and her true will. Detective Hayes stood between us and the site. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The forensic pathologist, you know how she pathologist, had explained the process to me beforehand. A quiet, respectful recovery of tissue from the namples, from the vital organs, ensuring Catherine's resting place would be restored with dignity within a few hours. But knowing that didn't make watching the earth move any easier. At 6:12 a.m., Hayes's phone. She stepped away to take the call, her professional composure instantly hardening into sharp alertness. When she walked back, her jaw was set tight. We have a major problem. Your son is at the precinct. My heart sank. What? He filed a missing person report at 5:30 a.m., Hayes explained. You know how she is, Dad. He's claiming you've been missing for 48 hours, showing signs of cognitive decline, and that you might be a danger to yourself. He brought a psychiatrist with him, demanding an emergency mental evaluation. Margaret's expression turned to ice. He's trying to have James declared incompetent. That's exactly his play, Hayes agreed. You know how she is, Dad, turning to me. If he can get a doctor to sign off on your mental capacity, he can file for emergency guardianship. He'll gain complete control over your finances, your medical decisions, everything. Can he actually do that? I asked, panicked. Not if we get there first, Hayes said, already heading toward her vehicle. We need to get to the precinct right now. You know how she is. The 15-minute drive to the precinct felt like an eternity. When we arrived at the Seattle Police Department's downtown division, the morning shift change was just beginning. Hayes bypassed the main desk, leading us through a side entrance and up to a second-floor conference room. Ryan was there, standing alongside a man in his late 40s wearing an expensive suit and gold-rimmed glasses, the psychiatrist. They both stood up as we entered. Ryan's face instantly contorted into a flood of deep concern. Dad, thank God. We've been worried sick. You haven't answered for your phone in toothache. Hayes cut in coldly. Save it. Hayes cut in coldly. Some who know how she is. Keep the performance for someone who hasn't watched the video of you and Marcus Cole discussing how to cut your father's brake lines. For a split second, Ryan's expression faltered. Then the mask of concern slipped right back on. Detective, I don't know what you think you have, but my father is clearly unwell. You know how she is, Dad. He's been showing extreme paranoia, likely early onset dementia. The psychiatrist stepped forward, introducing himself as Dr. Nathan Pierce. He claimed he had known the Mitchell family for years, and that Ryan had contacted him out of concern for my mental state, offering to conduct a voluntary evaluation. Shipton Sin. This is absolutely not voluntary. Margaret intervened sharply. My client is currently under protective custody with the Seattle Police Department due to a credible threat to his life. This is a transparent attempt to declare him incompetent to seize his assets. I reject any evaluation. And I refuse, I added, my voice steady. Ryan took a step toward me, pleading, know how she is, Dad, pleading with me to let them help and claiming I hadn't been myself since my wife passed. I reached into my folder and pulled out Catherine's letter, 8 pages in her own handwriting. Your mother wrote this the night you ended her life. April 14th at 11:30 p.m., just 3 hours before she fell. Would you like me to read it to everyone here? Should I read the part where she details your threats? Or the part where she warns me that I am your next target? Ryan froze. I set the letter down, I set the letter down and pulled out the true will. Or perhaps we should discuss the will you tried to hide. The one where your mother left 95% of our estate to charity. The one you thought you had successfully destroyed. Dr. Pierce looked between Ryan and me, thoroughly confused, asking Ryan what was going on. Or, Hayes added, retrieving her phone, we can just play the recording of you and Marcus Cole planning to sabotage Mr. Mitchell's vehicle. That one is particularly revealing. Ryan's polished composure finally shattered. His face went entirely blank, his eyes turning cold and calculating. I want my attorney. You're certainly going to need one, Hayes replied. She turned her attention to the doctor, asking how much Ryan had paid him to show up this morning. Dr. Pierce went rigid. After a heavy silence, he admitted to receiving $15, but tried to defend himself. And you drafted a mental competency assessment before ever meeting my client? Margaret pressed. No, the doctor stammered. Ryan provided me with background information, and I drafted a preliminary evaluation based on those details. Right. An evaluation declaring James Mitchell mentally unfit, recommending immediate emergency guardianship, Hayes said. She turned to the waiting officers. Take Dr. Pierce into custody for questioning on suspicion of conspiracy, fraud, and falsifying medical documentation. Ryan watched his associate being led away, then turned back to face us, his expression completely devoid of any warmth. You can't prove a thing. You know how she is, Dad. The exhumation is happening as we speak, Hayes told him. We'll have tissue samples by this afternoon. By Monday at the latest, you know how she is, Dad. We'll have the toxicology results showing exactly what you put in her vitamins. It's over, Ryan. For a long moment, Ryan just stared at me. Then, in a low whisper, he asked, Are you really going to do this? Are you really going to ruin your own son's life? You ruined your own life, I said quietly, the moment you put that substance in your mother's vitamins. Without another word, Ryan turned and walked out. You know how she is, Dad. Hayes quickly signaled 2 officers to follow him closely. I sank into a chair, suddenly feeling the full weight of exhaustion. Margaret's phone vibrated, and her face paled as she looked at the screen, noting it was a text from an unrecognized number. She turned the screen to show me the message. It's Jessica Mitchell. Marcus, coming, I'm a liability tonight. Ryan told him I'm a liability. You know how she is, Dad. He's going to make my death look like a self-inflicted tragedy out of guilt. I can't run anymore. Please help me. Hayes read the message over my shoulder and let out a quiet curse. She asked how quickly we could get to room 214 at the Motel 6 in Tacoma. Margaret estimated 45 minutes if we hurried. Ryan must have panicked and told Marcus to accelerate the timeline, I realized aloud. If you know how, is Dad. If he was desperate enough to try that psychiatric trap this morning, he's desperate enough to silence anyone who can testify against him. Hayes pulled out her radio, stating she was contacting the Tacoma Police Department to conduct a welfare check. She planned to secure Jessica Cat's dad. She planned to secure Jessica under wait for toxicology results, and then move to arrest both Ryan and Marcus simultaneously. As we left the station, the morning sun was climbing higher. Somewhere at Evergreen Cemetery, the team was gathering the physical evidence of Catherine's passing. You know how she is, Dad? In coma, Jessica was hiding, while Ryan and Marcus were undoubtedly scrambling to regroup. But for the first time in days, I felt like we've given us the path forward. Catherine had given us the path forward. Now, we just had to follow it to the end. You know how she is, Dad. By 6 p.m. that evening, Jessica Mitchell was sitting in a secure safe house in North Seattle, shivering under a blanket, despite the room being perfectly warm. You know how she is, Dad. Around noon, Hayes and her tactical team had successfully retrieved Jessica from the Tacoma motel, guiding her through a back exit into an unmarked van before driving straight to this secure, undisclosed location far from Ryan and Marcus's reach. Now, you know how she is, Dad. She sat across from me in a small conference room with Margaret and Hayes on either side and 2 officers guarding the door. See fille pile. She looked entirely different from the confident, vibrant woman I had seen at her wedding 5 years ago. Now, she was pale, exhausted, her eyes red from crying. She apologized to me for the 5th time, sobbing that Shai was so sorry about Catherine, claiming she never believed Ryan would actually go through with it. You know how she is, Dad. and thinking he was just venting to scare her into finding another way to handle the debt. Margaret's tone was firm but controlled. Jessica, we are offering you a full immunity agreement in exchange for your complete cooperation. That means testifying against Ryan in court and answering every single question truthfully. Toot. Do you understand? Yes, Jessica whispered. Then tell us about the plan for tomorrow, every single detail. Jessica took a shaky breath. Marcus is supposed to meet Ryan tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. At your house, she said, looking at me. Ryan had a spare key made 6 months ago. He can get inside. It was the house where Catherine and I had lived for 23 years, the place where she spent her final moments. What is the plan? Hayes asked. Marcus is going to make it look like an accidental overdose, Jessica revealed. A mix of sleeping pills and alcohol. You know how she is, Dad. Staged to look like a self-inflicted tragedy, a grieving husband who couldn't bear the loss of his wife. An awful silence fell over the room. And then Ryan will show up, Jessica continued. Around noon, he'll call the police, claiming he's been trying to reach his father all morning and is deeply worried. He'll play the devastated son who lost both parents in 6 months. No one would question it. How do you know this? Margaret asked. Ryan told me, Jessica confessed. Hull laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. 2 nights ago, when I told him I couldn't do this anymore, he said it was too late to back out. He told me that if I tried to run or talk, Marcus would handle me the exact same way. Hayes leaned forward. Jessica, did Ryan mention any backup plans? If Marcus hesitates or fails, Jessica said, Ryan will handle it himself. You know how she is, Dad. He has the chemical compounds in his car. He said it has to be finished this weekend before the toxicology results come back on Monday. He knows you're investigating Catherine's passing. He knows his time is running out. Hayes pulled out a notepad outlining a high-stakes strategy. You know how she is, Dad. She instructed me to be at my house at 5:00 a.m. tomorrow morning, equipped with a hidden transmitter, a GPS tracker, and an emergency panic button, waiting in the living room for Ryan's arrival. You want me to confront him? I asked. Yes, Hayes said. I want you to give him the opportunity to confess. Ask him questions. Let him speak. Make him believe he has you completely cornered. Men like Ryan, intelligent, arrogant, they can't help themselves. They want you to know how smart they are. And if he doesn't confess? Margaret asked, her expression grave. We won't have admissible physical evidence until the toxicology report comes back on Monday. By then, Ryan could be long gone. We need his words on tape, James. What about Marcus? I asked. We will have tactical officers stationed in the surrounding properties, Hayes assured me. The moment either Ryan or Marcus makes a move against you, we can breach the house in under 10 seconds. Jessica spoke up quietly, warning that Marcus wouldn't enter the house until he was certain the coast was clear. Meaning Ryan would go in alone first. Then we secure the confession from Ryan while he is alone, Hayes decided. We arrest Ryan inside before Marcus even approaches, and then we intercept Marcus as he moves in. What if something goes wrong? I asked. You know how she is, Dad. Hayes looked me dead in the eye, admitting that the risk was high given how cornered and unpredictable Ryan had become, instructing me to press the panic button if needed so they could breach immediately. I thought of Catherine's letter. I thought of how she had faced Ryan alone, gathering evidence, trying to protect me while I slept soundly upstairs. I'll do it, I said. Hayes nodded slowly. You know how she is, Dad. Then we begin preparations. My team will get you wired tonight and run through the panic button protocols. The team will be in position by 4:30 a.m. You enter the house at 5:00 a.m., turn on a single lamp in the living room and wait. And I just talk to him? You talk to him. You listen. You know how she is, Dad. You let him tell you exactly what he did. And no matter what he says, you stay calm. The rest of the night passed in a blur of preparation. The technician fitted me with a tiny transmitter hidden inside my collar, slipped a GPS tracker into my shoe, handed me a panic button, and panic disguised as a car key fob. He instructed me to press the button quickly 3 times if I needed immediate tactical extraction. I tried to sleep, but it was impossible. You know how she is, Dad. I lay on the cot in the safe house, staring at the ceiling, waiting for dawn. At 4:30 a.m., Hayes drove me back to my neighborhood. The streets were dark and perfectly still. The neighbors' homes looked completely normal, but I knew six armed officers were hiding nearby, watching and waiting. Hayes stopped 2 houses down from mine, telling me to walk the rest of the way, enter through the front door as normal, turn on a single light, you know how she is it, and sit where they could see me through the window, reminding me that they were right there with me. I walked toward my house in the pre-dawn chill, unlocked the front door, you know how she is, Dad, and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as I had left it days ago. Catherine's reading glasses still sat on her desk. My unwashed coffee mug was still in the sink. This was the home where we had built our lives, raised our son, and expected to grow old together. To grow old together. The home where that same son had ended her life. I switched on the reading lamp next to the sofa and sat in the armchair facing the window. You know how she is, Dad, checking the transmitter and the panic button. It was 5 a.m. The house was dead quiet, save for the ticking of the kitchen clock. I waited. 5:15, 5:30, 5:45. At 5:52 a.m., I heard the sound. You know how she is, Dad, the distinct slide of a key into the lock. The front door opened slowly and quietly, and Ryan stepped inside, his figure silhouetted against the dim morning light. You know how she is. He was carrying a black duffel bag. In that quiet, darkened living room, our eyes met. He'd laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was face to face with my son. Ryan closed the door behind him and flipped the light switch. The sudden brightness made me blink, but I didn't move from my chair. For a second, he just stared at me. Then his face softened into a look of relieved concern, one that probably would have fooled me a week ago. Dad, thank God. I was so worried. You haven't been answering your phone. I sat perfectly still, my hand inside my pocket, gripping the panic button. The transmitter under my collar was capturing every sound. Through the window, I could see a faint movement near the neighbor's house. Hayes and her team were watching. I know about the $680,000, Ryan. I know about Jessica's debts. And I know about Marcus. You know how she is, Dad. The relief on his face vanished instantly. He stood up straight, letting out a cold, hollow laugh, asking if Allison or Jessica had been the one to confess. He shook his head, remarking that it didn't matter now that I was here. He knelt down and slowly unzipped the black duffel bag. How she is, Dad. His mask completely gone, as he looked up and asked if I wanted to see what he brought. One by one, he placed the items on the coffee table. A bottle of sleeping pills with the prescription label torn off. A syringe still its sterile a syringe still in its sterile packaging. A roll of heavy cord, latex gloves, a bottle of whiskey. This is what grief looks like, Dad, Ryan said, slipping on the latex gloves. A 64-year-old bear the loss of his wife, Lassa said. A 64-year-old widower, unable to bear the losses of... He takes too many pills, maybe has a few drinks. You'll leave a note which I've already prepared in your handwriting. It says you couldn't live without Mom. It's very moving. I couldn't speak. This was the boy I had taught to ride a bike. You look shocked, Ryan said as he prepared the materials. You shouldn't be. You're the one who started digging. You shouldn't be digging. You couldn't how she accept that Mom passed from a medical crisis and let it go. It wasn't a natural crisis, I said. No, Ryan agreed calmly. It wasn't. Mom discovered the missing trust funds in March and started tracking every withdrawal. She confronted me 3 weeks before she passed, threatening to write Maud out of the will and go to the police if I didn't return the money. He picked up the sheet was a bottle of sleeping pills. I tried to reason with her. I explained. Jessica's debt, $920,000. Those lenders aren't people you can just say no to. So you took your mother's life for money? Ryan's expression hardened. I saved my wife's life and my own. Mom had already lived her life. Jessica and I have decades ahead of us. It was a practical decision. A practical decision. A practical decision. Yes. The compound simulated a sudden cardiac event perfectly, breaking down rapidly. I put it in her she is. I'd in her vitamins on the 14th. She took them around 11 p.m., and by 3 a.m., it was over. And you watched her fall. You waited 12 minutes to call for help. 12 minutes. His eyes flickered. I had to be certain. It wasn't cruelty, Dad. It was thoroughness. My hand tightened around the panic button. It wasn't time yet. Hayes had told me to let him keep talking. What about the will? I asked. Mom had drafted a new will, leaving 95% of the estate to charity, leaving me with almost nothing. So, the day after the funeral while you were upstairs, you know how I searched her desk, found the new will, and destroyed it. I replaced it with the old one that leaves me $1.5 million. Too bad she kept a copy in her safe deposit box, I noted. Ryan narrowed his eyes. It won't matter. By the time anyone finds it, you'll be gone, and the estate will already be settled. Holding yous, Dad. He stood up, holding the pills and the syringe, telling me I could take the pills painlessly, or he would use the syringe. But that either way, you know how she is, Dad. I would lose consciousness before he staged the scene. He took a step closer. You know how she is, Dad, claiming I had brought this on myself by refusing to sign the authority documents and continuing to dig until I found the glasses. He paused. The glasses, Ryan muttered, his eyes widening. Where are Mom's glasses? She hid a camera in them, didn't she? I didn't answer. Of course she did, Ryan realized, his voice rising. I walked past them every day for 5 months. She recorded everything. Me altering her vitamins, her falling on the kitchen floor. You know how she is, Dad. He looked at me with a twisted sense of respect, realizing I had seen the videos and must be recording our conversation right now. With sudden speed, he lunged forward, grabbing my collar and hauling me up. His hand found the wire of my transmitter, ripping it away, throwing it to the floor, and crushing it under his boot. You know how she is, Dad. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? He snarled. My hand was already Dad. My hand was already in my pocket, pressing the panic button 3 times in rapid succession. Ryan grabbed the syringe, tearing open the packaging, telling me I should have trusted my son instead of trying to play detective. He raised the needle and took a step toward me. Suddenly, the front door was violently kicked open. Detective Hayes charged in first with her weapon drawn, followed by 6 tactical officers shouting for him to drop the one and show his hands. Ryan froze. For a second, I thought he might resist, But then he dropped the syringe, letting he drop the syringe clatter against the hardwood floor. He sank to his knees, raising his hands, and demanded his attorney. Hayes moved in to secure him in handcuffs while the officers secured the duffel bag and began photographing the scene. Another officer helped me to my feet. "Did you get all of it?" I asked Hayes, gesturing to the destroyed transmitter. "Even after he ripped it off?" She tapped her earpiece with a faint smile. "We had a back how she is, Dad. We had a backup microphone installed in your smoke detector yesterday, not to mention the one in your shoe. We heard every single word, Mr. Mitchell. We have a complete confession." Ryan looked up at me from the floor, his hands secured behind his back, asking if I was really going to testify against my own flesh and blood. "You aren't my son," I said quietly. "How? I don't know who he is, Dad, but you are not the boy Catherine and I raised as T." They led him out of the house as the flashing lights illuminated the street side. Margaret walked through the door asking if I was all right outside. I wouldn't be walked through the door asking if I was all right. I wasn't. I wouldn't be for a very long time. But I nodded anyway, never truly be the same. But I nodded anyway, telling her it was over. Tuesday. It is, Hayes agreed, coordinating the scene as the technicians gathered evidence. I stood in the living room, looking at the items Ryan had brought to end my life in the exact same manner he had ended his mother's. But Catherine had made sure I was prepared. Her reading glasses, her letter, her voice recording, and her true will. "She know how she is, Dad." She had fought back from beyond to protect me, and in the end she had won. Detective Hayes stood over Ryan, reading him his rights in a calm, steady voice. Ryan remained on his knees, his expression entirely blank as the crime scene technicians continued their work. When asked if he understood his rights, Ryan simply repeated his demand for his attorney, stating he wouldn't say another word. "Oh, how she is," laughed about it. "Yeah, you said. More than enough," Hayes replied. She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen, letting Ryan's own recorded voice fill the room, clearly admitting to the plan and the pressure from the casino lenders. "You know how she is, Dad." Hayes stopped the playback, explaining that the confession had been captured by the backup microphone in the smoke detector. "You know how she is, Dad," ensuring they had every word, even after he destroyed the primary wire. I realized then that Hayes had kept the backup device a secret even from me. "You know how she vidged on," ensuring Ryan wouldn't find it if he searched me. It was an incredibly smart precaution. Suddenly, an officer's voice crackled over the radio, warning of movement at the back of the house. Hayes's hand immediately moved to her weapon as she demanded to know who was there. A male suspect, hands in the air, stating he is here to surrender. Detective Hayes headed toward the back door, and I followed closely behind. The door opened slowly, revealing a man in his late 40s, of average build, dressed in dark clothing. His hands were raised high. He identified himself calmly as Marcus Cole, stating kept her there to surrender me. Hayes kept her weapon trained on him, instructing him to get on his knees with his hands behind his head. He laughed about it. "You know how she is, Dad." Marcus complied without hesitation, stating he was unarmed and carried a flash drive containing critical information in his Nell's left jacket 2's pocket. Hayes signaled an officer to retrieve the drive and conduct a thorough search of the suspect. He'd laughed about it. When asked why he was turning himself in, Marcus looked past Hayes toward Ryan, explaining that, as a professional, he'd laughed about it. He had no intention of taking the blame for an amateur's mistakes. He revealed that he had recorded every single conversation with Ryan since October 1st, totaling how she is, Dad, totaling 8 files that detailed every planning session, payment discussion, and instruction. Hayes asked for clarification regarding the vehicle sabotage. Marcus corrected her, stating that was not answered with orders. The brakes. He explained that when Mr. Attorney approached him to stage an accident, the Schultz tampered approached him that he had an accident involving his father. He took precautions by Hughes approached him. He took spines by investigating recording. He took precautions by investigating. He took precautions as his own insurance policy. He's explained, "You know how she is, Dad." He offered a cold, professional smile, noting that clients like Ryan often tried to eliminate witnesses. "You know how she is, Dad." He admitted to accepting the $50,000 payment, half of it up front, while documenting everything to prove he was merely a contractor if the plan went sideways. Hayes noted that he had systematically gathered evidence against his own client. Marcus agreed, stating he was protecting his own interests because Ryan was bound to fail. Pointing to the flash drive, Hayes asked what was on it. "You know how she is, Dad." Marcus detailed the 8 recordings spanning from October 1st to the day before, capturing every conversation where Ryan explained the compound where Ryan Extasius on his honors mother discussed staging his father's overdose and negotiated the $50,000 payment. "You know how she is, Dad." He looked Hayes in the eye, reiterating that he had never touched my car or cut any brake lines, but had simply delayed the job to see if Ryan would actually go through with it. "You know how she is, Dad." Hayes turned to me, asking if I had ever seen this man before. I confirmed that I had never seen him in my life. Hayes turned back to Marcus. "You know how she is, Dad," informing him that he was still under arrest for conspiracy. Marcus accepted this, expressing his willingness to testify against Ryan in exchange for a plea agreement and reduced sentencing. "You know how she is, Dad." The officers handcuffed Marcus and led him to a patrol car. As he passed Ryan, he looked at him with a hint of pity. "You know how she is, Dad," remarking that he had warned him about working with amateurs. Another police vehicle arrived, and Jessica was escorted out by officers. "You know how she is, Dad." They brought her toward the house, where she stood near the doorway, taking in the scene. She asked in a whisper if it was finally over. Hayes nodded, stating they needed her to confirm what Marcus had just disclosed. Jessica's confession was brief but devastating. She confirmed that Ryan had hired Marcus, that she was fully aware of the plan, and that Ryan had insisted both Catherine and I needed to be gone before the end of the year. At 7:30 a.m., Margaret's phone rang. When she returned to the house, she was pale. She informed about it. She informed Hayes that she had received the preliminary results from the pathologist, confirming a high concentration of the substandard chemical compound in Catherine's heart tissue, leaving no doubt that her passing was unnatural. Hayes nodded slowly. "How she is, Dad," declaring that this was now a formal homicide investigation. They escorted Ryan into a patrol car. Through the window, he caught my eye one last time, accusing me of destroying his life for the sake of a woman who was already gone. I stepped closer to the window to ensure he heard me, stating that he had destroyed his own life the moment he altered his mother's vitamins. The door closed. "You know how she, Dad?" And the patrol car drove away, taking my son to a place where he would likely spend the rest of his days. I stood in the front yard as the morning sun climbed higher into the sky. Neighbors watched from a respectful distance. For the first time in 5 months, I was able to breathe easily. Catherine had spent her final hours gathering evidence, protecting me, and ensuring Ryan could not escape justice. She had hidden the camera, recorded the conversations, updated her will, and written the letter, fighting him, written the letter, step by step. Standing in the sunlight watching the police vehicles surround my home, I realized the truth. She had won. Not just for herself, but for me, and for justice. Hayes walked over to me, her expression gentler than I had ever seen it. She suggested I go get Dad, noting some rest, noting they would need a full statement later, but assuring me that I was finally safe. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. As the officers packed up their gear and began to leave, I looked up at the clear sky. It was going to be a beautiful day, and wherever Catherine was, she knew I was safe. That was all that mattered. You know how she is, Dad. A week after Ryan's arrest, Margaret called with news I never expected to hear. He had been granted bail. Bullplist inted. I was standing in the kitchen, the very room where Catherine had collapsed, gripping the edge of the counter as I asked her how this was possible. He'd laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. Margaret explained that the judge set bail at $2 million, which Jessica's wealthy family had secured using their estate in Charleston. She noted with frustration that Jessica had apparently convinced them that Ryan was framed. I asked if he was simply walking free. She clarified that it came with strict conditions. He had surrendered his passport, was fitted with a GPS ankle monitor, was confined to King County. You know how she is, Dad, and was strictly barred from contacting me or any witnesses. But she confirmed he was out. I stared at the kitchen floor. Ryan was walking free somewhere in Seattle, while my wife lay in her grave. I asked her to tell me we could still win this. She assured me we could. You know how she is, Dad, but warned that his attorney was highly capable and already moving to build a defense. That afternoon, I met Margaret at her office, where she had spread out motions, petitions, and medical evaluation across her desk. You know how she is, Dad. She introduced his attorney as Jonathan Price, a 55-year-old former King County prosecutor who had won 3 high-profile homicide defense cases in the last decade. I asked what defense strategy they were using. Consid. Margaret slid a motion across the desk, explaining they were pursuing a mental capacity defense, claiming Ryan's suffered a psychological breakdown after learning his mother had cognitive decline. I protested immediately, stating that Catherine had no such condition. She knew. You know how she is, Dad. Margaret agreed, noting the claim was entirely fabricated, but explained that Price was crafting a narrative of a devoted son driven to instability. She pointed out that he was citing a psychiatric evaluation signed by Dr. Nathan Pierce back in September. I stared at the document. You know how she is, Dad, realizing it was the same doctor who had tried to declare me incompetent. I noted that Pierce had been arrested. He laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. Margaret confirmed this, explaining that whether exactly why the defense would fail. She pulled out another folder containing Pierce's financial records, showing a spreadsheet of payments from Ryan to Dr. Pierce totaling $280,000 over the last 3 years. My end. He'd laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. She revealed there were 9 separate evaluations documenting Ryan's alleged mental struggles, all of which were fabricated and paid for. I realized he had spent 3 years building this defense. Margaret confirmed he was establishing an insurance policy, knowing that if he ever faced charges, he would have documented mental health history to fall back on. I remarked that this wasn't instability. It was deliberate more preparation. She agreed completely, stating this was exactly how she would counter the defense in court, arguing that someone spent 3 years, a genuine crisis does not $3,000 and nearly $300,000 psychiatric evidence, staging psychiatric evidence. Margaret pulled out additional documents, explaining that forensic accountant Thomas Reed had uncovered an offshore account in the Cayman Islands where Ryan had transferred and $50,000 from the family trust. He had been hiding funds as part of a long-term plan to eliminate Catherine and me and disappear. You know how she is, Dad. 5 more documents, each carrying the stamp of the King County Prosecutor's Office, identifying Amanda Morrison as the lead prosecutor who had filed 5 formal charges. Margaret read them aloud. Dude's first-degree murder carrying a life sentence without parole, attempted assault carrying 25 years, Hastabit, died his dad, financial diversion carrying 20 years, insurance fraud carrying 15 years, and conspiracy carrying 20 years. She laid the papers down. You know how she is, Dad, noting that if convicted on all counts, Ryan would spend the rest of his life behind glass. I asked about our chances. Margaret was direct, stating that given the evidence, his chances were incredibly, she listed our alley low. The video of Ryan tampering with the vitamins, the audio discussing the compounds, Catherine's letter and voice memo, the exhumation results, Marcus Cole's recordings, the forged policy, the fake evaluations, and the offshore account. You know how she is, Dad. She leaned forward, noting that while Jonathan Price was skilled, he couldn't undo the facts. He didn't undo the facts. Ryan had no mental illness. He simply had a mountain of debt, a spouse with a gambling problem, and a willingness to eliminate his parents to solve his financial issues. I asked when the trial would begin. She confirmed the prosecutor was pushing for an early December date, with jury selection starting in the first week, less than a month away. I asked what was required of me. She told me I would be their key witness, explaining that the prosecutor would guide me through discovering the glasses, the videos, Catherine's letter, and the confrontation in the living room, emphasizing that I needed to remain clear, calm, and compelling. I nodded, though my hands were shaking. You know how she is, Dad. Margaret's voice softened as she asked if I was truly ready to sit in that courtroom and testify against my own son. I recalled against my own's letter, remembering how she had protected me in her final hours, gathering evidence even while knowing she might not survive to see justice. I looked at Margaret and told her I was ready. You know how she is, Dad. That evening, a letter was hand-delivered to my house by a member of Ryan's defense team. My name was written on the envelope in Ryan's handwriting. I almost threw it away, but opened it instead. The letter read, "Dad, I am so sorry. I know these words aren't enough. I was cornered. Jessica's debts were crushing me. I never wanted things to go this far. I never wanted to hurt Mom. I never wanted to hurt you. Please, Dad, drop the charges. Talk to the prosecutors. Tell them you don't want to pursue this. I am still your son. I made terrible mistakes, but I can change. I can get help. Please don't let them lock me away for the rest of my life. Please don't abandon your only son. I love you, Dad. Ryan." I read it twice, trying to find any trace of the boy I had raised or any genuine remorse, but there was only manipulation. He wasn't sorry for taking Catherine's life. He was only sorry he had been Dad. He was only sorry he had been caught. I tore the letter into pieces and threw them into the trash. Margaret had asked if I was ready to testify against my son. I was ready. You know how she is, Dad, because the man who wrote that letter was no longer my son. The trial would begin in 3 weeks, and when that day came, I would ensure Catherine's voice was heard. Every word she recorded, every piece of evidence she gathered, and every truth she fought to protect. Ryan wanted mercy, but Catherine's justice was far more important. November 4th was cold and gray. It was a typical Seattle morning. He'd meant in with rain threatening to fall from a heavy, overcast sky. Margaret and I walked up the steps of the King County Courthouse together. The sidewalk was crowded with camera crews, as the case had become a major media story. I kept my head down, letting Margaret manage the reporters shouting questions. Inside, the courthouse was filled with marble, and our footsteps echoed down the grand corridors we passed, through security, and took the elevator to the 4th floor, entering courtroom 4C, presided over by Judge Patricia Holloway. As the gallery filled, Judge Holloway sat at her bench reviewing files. At 60, with her gray hair pulled tightly into a severe bun, she was known as a no-nonsense judge. Ryan was already seated at the defense table next to Jonathan Heese, wearing a dark suit, white shirt, and conservative tie. He turned back his ankle monitor, hidden beneath his trousers. He turned back as by second before he looked away, nominating for a brief second. The jury box was filled with 12 individuals selected over 2 days. Seven women and 5 men, including a retired teacher, a software engineer, a nurse, and an accountant. 12 strangers who would decide my son's fate. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Holloway rapped her gavel, calling the court to order. You know how she is, Dad? She announced the case of the state versus Ryan Thomas Mitchell, asking if both sides were ready for opening statements. Amanda Morrison stood up. You know how she is, Dad. Dressed in a professional Navy suit, her dark hair pulled back. She looked sharp, serious, and thoroughly prepared as she confirmed the prosecution was ready. Amanda walked toward the jury box, making eye contact with each juror before she began. She presented a case of greed, betrayal, and cold calculation. She explained that Ryan Mitchell hadn't just ended his mother's life. He had planned it for months, procured the substances, tampered with her daily vitamins, watched collapse before the kitchen floor, and watched her collapse on the kitchen floor, and waited 12 full minutes before calling for help. Her voice was calm and deliberate, letting the devastating facts speak for themselves. She explained that he didn't stop there, outlining his plan to eliminate his father next, hire a professional actor, forge insurance documents, and attempt to have his father declared mentally unfit to seize control of a $3.2 million estate. She let that figure linger in the air. She promised the jury they would hear from James Mitchell. View video of Ryan with the vitamins, hear Catherine's the jury tampering with the vitamins, hear Catherine's own voice warning her husband of the threat, and review the forensic evidence proving her passing was unnatural. Amanda walked back to the prosecution table, adding that they would also hear from Nathan Daz Pierce, who accepted $280,000 over 3 years to falsify mental evaluations to build a preemptive psychiatric defense in case Ryan was caught. She know how she is, Dad. She looked directly at Ryan, describing him as a 39-year-old practicing attorney who knew exactly what he was doing, concluding that this was not a tragedy of mental illness, but a story of greed and calculated harm. She sat down, leaving the courtroom in absolute silence. Jonathan Price then stood up, wearing a gray suit without a tie, offering a somber smile to the jury. You know how she is. He presented a narrative of a family devastated by both his parents, but had suffered from an undiagnosed dissociative disorder which compromised his judgment. He noted that Dr. Pierce had documented these struggles. Some of the jurors shifted uncomfortably. Price continued, but the opening statement felt hollow. As the falsified psychiatric reports had already destroyed any credibility the defense might have had. Judge Holloway turned to Amanda, instructing her to call her first witness. Amanda called James Robert Mitchell to the stand. You know how she is, Dad. I stood up, feeling a supportive squeeze on my arm from Margaret, before taking the stand, swearing the oath, and facing the courtroom. Sue's dad. Amanda systematically guided me through the entire sequence of events. Finding the glasses, the video of Ryan with the vitamins, Catherine's voice memo, the safe deposit box, the confrontation in my living room, and Ryan's confession. I kept my voice steady, answering every question clearly. Then, Jonathan Price stood up for cross-examination. He asked if Jonathan Price stood up for crossing during that time, suggesting that mourning can compromise cognitive function and suggesting that mourning can compromise function and cause people to see things that aren't there. I looked him in the eye. Stating that my grief did not alter what was captured on video, nor did it change hearing my son admit to delaying medical help for 12 minutes. I emphasized that it wasn't a trick of the mind, but hard evidence. Price tried a few more angles, but I remained unshaken, and after 20 minutes, Judge Holloway excused me. "You know how she is, Dad." The next 3 days were a presentation of overwhelming evidence. Amanda systematically laid out the hidden camera footage, Catherine's voice memo, the recordings from Allison and Marcus Cole, the forensic reports, the financial audits, the forged policy, and Catherine's true will. "You know how she is, Dad." Each piece of evidence fell like a hammer. Looking at the jurors, I saw expressions of shock, disgust, and anger. On the 5th day, Dr. Nathan Pierce took the stand, and Amanda completely dismantled his credibility. She pressed him on how much Ryan had paid him to falsify the evaluations. Pierce's voice was barely a whisper as he admitted to receiving $280,000 over 3 years to draft reports for non-existent conditions. "You know how she is, Dad." When she excused him, the doctor was visibly trembling. On the 6th day, Ryan took the stand. On the 6th day, and the courtroom was fitly silent. Jonathan Price asked 3 preliminary questions before asking of Ryan if he had intentionally harmed his mother. Ryan looked at the jury, then at the judge, before stating that he mentioned his cremation, making that he was invoking his 5th crimination. Before stating that he was invoking his 5th Amendment right against self-incrimination. The courtroom, he'd shiz, Dad. The courtroom erupted into murmurs, and Judge Holloway had to rap her gavel. In the eyes of the jury, the move spoke volumes. The closing arguments took another full day, and then the case was handed over to the jury for deliberation. Hours passed. Finally, announced that at 4:30 p.m., the bailiff announced that a verdict had been reached. We returned to our seats as the jury filed back in, their expressions unreadable. Judge Holloway asked the foreperson. The foreperson confirmed they had. The foreperson confirmed they had. My heart hammered in my chest as she stood up to read the decision. I thought I was prepared for the verdict. But as we stood waiting outside courtroom 4C, the anxiety was overwhelming. The jury had been deliberating for 9 hours. Margaret checked her phone, noting that a long deliberating. Her phone, noting that a long deliberation usually meant the jury was being exceptionally thorough. Busy with... I nodded, my hands shaking, just as they had when I first held Catherine's broken glasses in Daniel's shop. I pressed my palms against my knees and stared at the floor. At 10:47 a.m., the bailiff opened the doors, announcing that the jury had returned. The gallery was packed. I sat in the front row with Margaret. "You know how she is, Dad," while Jonathan Price sat alone at the defense table across the aisle. Ryan was led in from the side door, handcuffed and expressionless, avoiding my gaze entirely. Judge Holloway entered, entire, and the court rose. She instructed everyone to be seated and turned to the jury box. The foreperson, a retired elementary school teacher from Ballard. Our elementary school teacher from Ballard stood up and confirmed they had. The bailiff carried the document to the judge, who reviewed it silently before handing it back and instructing the defendant to stand. Ryan stood beside his attorney. "You know how she is, Dad." The foreperson read the verdict, declaring the defendant guilty of first-degree murder in the passing of Catherine Ann Mitchell. A murmur ran through the courtroom, and someone gasped behind me. Margaret reached over and gripped my hand tightly. The foreperson continued, finding the defendant guilty of conspiracy to commit harm against James Robert Mitchell. You know how she, Dad, financial diversion of $680,000 from the family trust, insurance fraud regarding the $1.5 million policy, and criminal conspiracy involving Marcus Cole. Judge Holloway waited for the courtroom to quiet down, noting that Ryan had been found guilty on all 5 counts. She scheduled sentencing for November 22nd at 9. "You know how she is, Dad." 00 a.m. and ordered the defendant remanded into custody. Ryan turned his head slightly, looking at me for the first time since the verdict with hollow, empty eyes before being led away. Outside the courthouse, Margaret delivered a brief statement to the media, stating that Catherine Mitchell had protected her husband and exposed that Catherine Mitchell had protected her husband in her final hours. She noted that justice had been served for conspiracy in her Catherine's courage, hoping modded that justice had been served big strips because of Catherine's courage, hoping the verdict would bring peace to the family. A reporter shouted a question in my direction, but I simply shook my head as Margaret guided me toward direction. But as Margaret guided me toward her car, the courtroom was much quieter on the day of sentencing. There were no cameras or crowds, just the key legal teams and a few court staff. Judge Holloway silently reviewed the pre-sentencing report before looking up at Ryan. "You know how she is, Dad." She noted the severity of the convictions, stating that the sentence must reflect the gravity of his actions. For the murder of Catherine Ann Mitchell, "You know how she is, Deej." She sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with consecutive 25-year sentences for each of the remaining 4 charges. Ryan stood motionless. When asked if he had anything to say, he simply shook his head. The judge adjourned the court. The visitor's room smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. I sat on a metal stool, staring through the thick glass, waiting. A guard escorted Ryan to the other side, and he picked up the receiver. I did the same. For a long time, neither of us spoke. "You came," I finally. "I came to say goodbye," I replied. He looked older and thinner, his orange jumpsuit hanging loosely from his shoulders. "I didn't want things to go this far," he said quietly. I needed the money. Jessica's family, the casino, the debts. It was overwhelming. And Mom found out. She was going to cut me off, Dad. I panicked. "You put a chemical compound in her vitamins," I said calmly. "You watched her fall, and you waited 12 minutes to call for help." His eyes flickered, but he didn't deny it. "And you plan to do the same to me," I added. He remained silent. I placed the receiver back on the cradle, stood up, and walked toward the exit. "Dad," he called out. I didn't look back. I drove home in silence. "You know how she is, Dad." In my rearview mirror, the prison gates grew smaller till they vanished entirely. I didn't cry. Catherine had fought for the truth in her final hours, leaving me a roadmap, a warning, and her true will to ensure I wouldn't be next. Now, justice had been served. My new apartment in Capitol Hill was remarkably quiet. I sat in an armchair overlooking Puget Sound from my 6th-floor home. Suman Nasalfabat. It was now December 2024, 6 weeks after the sentencing and 8 months since I had found Catherine's broken glasses. Rain tapped gently against the window. You know how she is, Dad. And, for the first time in a year, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. Margaret had helped me find this place, advising me that I needed a fresh start somewhere I could honor Catherine's memory without being surrounded by the tragedy. She was right. I couldn't stay in that house anymore, knowing what had occurred in that kitchen. So I packed up only the essentials, some photos, her favorite books, and her wooden gardening box, and donated the rest. The apartment was small, clean, and faced east, allowing me to watch the sunrise over the water, and the ferries cross the bay each morning. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life I could live. On a Tuesday afternoon in March 2025, Margaret called me. She delivered news about Jessica. You know how she is, Dad, explaining that she had suffered a severe reaction to medication at a recovery facility the week prior. While she survived, you know how she is, Dad, she had suffered permanent cognitive impairment and would require lifelong care. You know how she is, Dad, I closed my eyes, expecting to feel anger or satisfaction, but feeling only a quiet, empty sadness. Margaret mentioned that her family was arranging long-term care and had asked if I wished to visit. No, I said softly. She helped him plan it, Margaret. You know how she is, Dad. She knew what Ryan was going to do and chose to stay silent. I can't sit by her bedside pretending otherwise. Margaret was quiet for a moment before validating my decision. After we hung up, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the rain, laughed about it. Jessica would spend the rest of her days unable to fully grasp what had happened, while I would spend the rest of mine trying to put behind me. You know how she is, Dad. On a bright Thursday morning in May, I drove to the Patterson Marks firm in Pioneer Square. He'd laughed about it. Helen Patterson, the attorney who had notarized Catherine's true will, welcomed me into the conference room. She presented the final execution documents, transferring 95% of Catherine's estate, amounting to $2.7 million. To the Family Justice Foundation, you know how she is, a nonprofit providing free legal aid to elderly victims of financial exploitation. You know how she is, Dad. Helen shared that the foundation wished to establish a new program in her honor, the Catherine Mitchell Elder Protection Initiative, which would fund legal clinics. You know how she is, Dad, emergency interventions and educational seminars. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion, knowing she would have been incredibly proud. 2 weeks later, you know how she is, Dad, I attended the launch ceremony at the Seattle Public Library. A small plaque bearing Catherine's name and dates was unveiled in the foundation's lobby. Surrounded by elderly clients, the program had already begun to help. One grandmother approached me after the ceremony with tears in her eyes. You know how she is, Dad, sharing that the clinic had helped stop her own family from taking her home and assets when she didn't know where else to turn. You know how she is, Dad. I smiled, realizing that even though Catherine was gone, her strength was still protecting people, just as she had protected me. And as I walked out into the warm Seattle sunshine, I knew that was her true legacy. I held her hand, unable to find the words. Catherine was gone, but her spirit was still protecting people. In June, I sold the Ballard House for $2.8 million. You know how Sminyerzun, the new owners, were a young couple expecting their first baby. They fell in love with the garden, the large windows, and the breakfast nook where Catherine used to sit and read the Sunday paper. I never told them what had happened there. I used the proceeds to purchase my condo in Capitol Hill and donated a portion to the Catherine Mitchell Elder Protection Initiative. I also began How She Is, Dad. I also began volunteering 2 days a week at the Seattle Senior Rights Clinic, a legal aid office that helps older adults navigate fraud, abuse, and exploitation. I'm not an attorney, but I know how to listen. I can sit beside seniors who are terrified, betrayed by their own flesh and blood, and tell them, you will get through this. You are not alone. You will get through this. It doesn't erase what Ryan did, but it gives me a reason to wake up every morning. On a Saturday morning in July, a letter arrived from the Washington State Penitentiary. It was the third one Ryan had sent. I didn't open it. I wrote return to sender across the envelope and dropped it back into the mailbox. Then I drove out to Evergreen Cemetery. Catherine's resting place was in a quiet corner beneath a maple tree. The headstone was simple and elegant. Catherine Ann Mitchell, 1962-2024. Beloved wife, protector, light. I knelt on the grass and placed a bouquet of white roses beside the stone. Hey, sweetheart, I whispered. It's been a while. You saved me, you know. You know how she is, Dad. You left me everything I needed to survive. And now, I'm going to help others, just like you helped me. I stayed there for a long time, just like you helped me. I stayed there for a long time, just sitting on the grass, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. Later that afternoon, I walked through Volunteer Park and sat on a bench overlooking the reservoir. An older couple, easily in their 70s, walked past holding hands. The woman laughed at something her husband said, and he leaned over and kissed her forehead. I smiled. A genuine, heartfelt smile for the first time in over a year. You know how she is, Dad. I pulled out my phone and looked at a photo I had saved. Catherine in our garden, her hands covered in soil, her face absolutely radiant with joy. I set it as my lock screen. I didn't need to chase justice anymore. I just needed to live for her. So, here I am, sitting in my Capitol Hill apartment, looking at Catherine's picture on my screen. If you've been following this story, I want to leave you with some words I wish someone had told me years ago. Pay attention. Look closely at the people you love, even, and especially, when they are quiet. He'd laughed about it. Catherine tried to handle the burden alone because she thought I couldn't bear the weight of the truth. I wish I had seen her fear before it was too late. Our instincts exist for a reason. When something feels off in your home, do not ignore it. Don't wait around for undeniable proof. Talk. Ask questions. Listen. This story of a father standing up for his family isn't something I'm proud of. I didn't plan it, and I certainly didn't want it. But when your own child crosses a line you never imagined they would even approach, you are left with an impossible choice. Protect yourself or protect the illusion. I chose survival. Some might call it a father's retaliation. I call it trying to live long enough to honor the woman who saved my life. Don't let silence poison your home. Don't assume everything is fine just because everyone is smiling. Ryan smiled at Catherine's funeral, even while he was actively planning my demise. Love your children, but keep your eyes wide open. If this journey of a father fighting back resonated with you, or if you've ever faced betrayal in your own life, please share your thoughts in the comments below. You know how she is, Dad, and if you want to hear more stories of resilience and truth, please subscribe. Your support means everything to me. Thank you for walking this difficult path with me.